Mr. President, I'm pleased to have a chance here to talk about the work that I think we should be doing this week and surely will do in the weeks to come. We are really discussing who we're going to be as a country. What model are we going to follow? Are we going to continue to be a country that believes that we need to help create opportunity? Are we going to be a country that believes that the government needs to continue to accept more and more of the challenges of life? Our debt today, Mr. President, is over $14 trillion, and apparently that's not enough. And so every discussion in Washington, including some that you're in, are focusing around the idea of how do we get even more ability to borrow more money so we can pay off the money we've already borrowed. There are 13 million Americans out of work today looking for a job, and we continue during that process to spend money we don't have for things we don't have to have. I think we ought to be focused totally on two things domestically right now. If at the top of every list should be, what do we do to create more private sector jobs, and how do we get federal spending under control? Now, the federal government doesn't create private sector jobs in very many instances. There are occasions with a public works project where, by the way, if we're going to have something that we're paying for 30 years, I'd hope we're investing in something that would last for 30 years. But most of what the federal government can do that impacts jobs is create an atmosphere that takes all the uncertainty out of that decision-making process that government can. There are enough risks in creating jobs without having the additional risk of how fast can the utility bill go up, how high are the taxes going to be, what new unknown regulations are you going to have to deal with. And frankly, those are the wrong messages in all three of those areas right now if you hope to be focused on that idea of how do we create jobs for those 13 million Americans that are looking for jobs and better jobs for the Americans that have jobs. What are we doing to encourage private sector job creation for the future? In spending, we're now spending at the federal level almost $1 out of $4. Right at $1 out of every $4 that the economy can create in goods and services. The number for 40 years ending in 2008 was $1 out of $5. And there's a lot of difference in an economy. Who competes for that dollar that the federal government's now spending that for 40 years was available for somebody else to get their hands on and use to opportunity for somebody else? We've got to get that under control. The co-chairs of the president's own fiscal commission say that we're looking at the most predictable economic crisis in the history of the country. There is a train moving down a track to a destination that nobody wants to go, and it continues to move at that same speed. It is totally predictable. It is something we have to do something about, and we can't continue to spend somewhere between $3.7 and $3.8 trillion in this spending year and collect $2.2 trillion. And I've said on this floor before that I'm not sure anybody really has a good grasp of what $3.8 trillion is, but we do know if you're making $22,000 and you're spending $38,000 and you've already borrowed all the money anybody really should have ever loaned you, you've got a problem that you can't deal with for very long without changing behavior. I think that behavior has to change. It has to change in ways that look at the programs that we up till now have just been able to define who benefits from the program without any real controls over how that money's spent. We've got this year the $2.2 trillion I mentioned that the federal government collected. That all was spent by the programs that we normally don't even appropriate money for because we've defined who gets that money. And for the first time ever, those programs exceeded all the money that came in. Most of those programs are, of course, the big programs that we want to be sure are there as safety nets for people who have been told they need to rely on them. I think about 80% of that side of the budget is Medicare and Medicaid and Social Security. We need to see what we do so those programs continue to work. But if all of that side of the budget spent all of the money, That means every other penny the federal government spent for an air traffic controller, for somebody to open the gates to a national park, sadly, for somebody to put on a military uniform, or to put a gallon of jet fuel in a plane, or to buy a gallon of paint for a ship, that was all done with borrowed money. We are defending the country on borrowed money. The number one obligation of the federal government is just that. And we've got to figure out what we do that structurally begins to define how we spend the money that comes in, and we don't spend more money that comes in. That's why, Mr. President, I'm supporting the balanced budget amendment. I think we need to spend a lot of July talking about what we do to get this budget back in balance, how long it takes, and I look forward to that debate being the principal debate of the next month, and I would yield my time back.